Why Stoicism is making millions mentally stronger. Every morning, millions of people wake up carrying a weight they cannot see. Before their feet even touch the floor, their minds have already begun racing. Yesterday's regrets replay like an endless film. Tomorrow's uncertainties arrive before breakfast. Notifications demand attention. News headlines fuel anxiety. Social media quietly whispers that everyone else is happier, richer, more successful, and somehow further ahead. Without realizing it, we spend enormous amounts of energy fighting battles that haven't happened, worrying about opinions we cannot control, and chasing a version of happiness that always seems just out of reach. Perhaps this sounds familiar. Maybe you've told yourself, once I get that promotion, I'll finally feel secure. Or perhaps you've believed that when life becomes less stressful, then you'll be able to enjoy it. Yet each achievement often gives only a brief sense of relief before the next worry appears. It's a cycle that has become so common we almost accept it as normal. But what if the greatest obstacle to peace isn't the world around us? What if it's the way we've been taught to think about the world? Modern life has given humanity extraordinary technology. We can communicate across continents in seconds. We carry more information in our pockets than entire civilizations once possessed. Yet despite these remarkable advances, rates of stress, anxiety, burnout, and emotional exhaustion continue to rise. It seems that while we've learned how to master machines, we've struggled to master our own minds. Surprisingly, the answer to this modern problem may not be found in the newest self-help trend or the latest productivity system. Instead, it may lie in a philosophy born more than 2,000 years ago, a philosophy that has quietly endured wars, empires, economic collapse, political turmoil, and countless generations of human struggle. Today, millions of people, from entrepreneurs and athletes to military leaders, psychologists, and everyday individuals, are turning to that ancient philosophy for guidance. It's called Stoicism. At first glance, the word itself is often misunderstood. Many people assume a Stoic is someone who suppresses emotion, never smiles, and faces life with cold indifference. But that's not what Stoicism teaches at all. The ancient Stoics never argued that emotion should disappear. Instead, they believed our emotions are deeply influenced by how we interpret the events around us. Change the way you think, they argued, and you begin to change the way you live. That idea might sound surprisingly modern, because it is. Long before neuroscience revealed how repeated thought patterns shape the brain, long before psychologists developed techniques to challenge irrational thinking, Stoic philosophers were asking a simple but profound question. What if suffering doesn't always come from events themselves, but from the meaning we attach to them? That question would become one of the most influential ideas in the history of philosophy. If you're looking for timeless wisdom, practical psychology, and evidence-based ideas that help you understand yourself and live with greater resilience, subscribe to The Human Code. Every documentary explores the hidden patterns behind human behavior, bringing together science, philosophy, and history to help you build a stronger mind. To understand why Stoicism has captured the attention of millions today, we have to travel back to ancient Greece. Around 300 BC, a merchant named Zeno of Citium experienced a disaster that changed the course of his life. After a shipwreck destroyed much of his wealth, he found himself in Athens with little left except questions. For many people, losing everything would have been the end of the story. For Zeno, it became the beginning. According to tradition, while wandering through a bookshop, he encountered the teachings of Socrates. Fascinated, he began studying philosophy, searching not for abstract theories, but for practical guidance on how to live well regardless of circumstances. Eventually, Zeno started teaching beneath a painted colonnade in Athens known as the Stoa Poikil. The Greek word stoa means porch, and from that simple location came the name Stoicism. Unlike many schools of philosophy that debated ideas for intellectual pleasure, Stoicism had a practical goal. It asked one question: how can a human being remain calm, wise, and morally grounded in a world they cannot control? Think about how relevant that question still is today. We cannot control the economy. We cannot control the weather. We cannot control other people's opinions. We cannot control unexpected illness. We cannot control traffic, social media algorithms, political decisions, or many of the events that shape our daily lives. Yet many of us spend enormous amounts of emotional energy trying to do exactly that. The Stoics noticed something remarkable. Human beings often suffer twice. First, from the event itself. Then from the story they tell themselves about the event. Imagine missing out on a job you desperately wanted. The event is painful, but then your mind begins. I'm not good enough. I'll never succeed. Everyone else is ahead of me. My future is ruined. Suddenly, the emotional pain becomes far greater than the original disappointment. This insight sits at the very heart of Stoic philosophy. Centuries later, modern psychology would arrive at a remarkably similar conclusion. One of the most effective treatments for anxiety and depression today is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Rather than assuming every thought is true, CBT teaches people to examine their beliefs, identify distortions, and replace them with more balanced ways of thinking. Although CBT is a modern, evidence-based, clinical approach developed independently of ancient philosophy, many scholars have noted interesting parallels between some Stoic ideas about interpreting events and the cognitive techniques used in therapy today. The similarities are striking. Both encourage people to pause before reacting. Both recognize that our interpretation of an event influences how we feel. Both remind us that while we cannot always choose what happens, we often have more influence over our response than we first imagine. The Stoics express this idea through what may be their most famous principle: some things are within your control, some things are not. Learning the difference changes everything. At first, this sounds almost too simple. Yet consider how much of modern stress comes from focusing on things beyond our control. Will everyone like us? Will our plans unfold perfectly? Will the future match our expectations? Will life always be fair? The answer, of course, is no. Stoicism doesn't deny that these uncertainties are difficult. Instead, it asks a different question. If you cannot control the outcome, what can you control today? Your effort, your character, your choices, your honesty, your discipline, your kindness, your courage. Those remain yours. And perhaps that's why Stoicism feels surprisingly hopeful rather than pessimistic. It doesn't promise that life will become easier. It promises that you can become stronger. That simple shift changes the conversation entirely. Instead of asking life to remove every obstacle, Stoicism teaches us to become the kind of person who can face obstacles with wisdom and resilience. History often remembers emperors, generals, and conquerors for the empires they built or the battles they won. But the men who shaped Stoicism are remembered for something entirely different. They didn't conquer the world. They learned to conquer themselves. Their greatest victories were not over enemies, but over fear, anger, grief, and uncertainty. The same emotions that still challenge us today. The first of these remarkable figures was Epictetus, a man whose life seemed destined for hardship. Born into slavery in the Roman Empire around the 1st century AD, he owned nothing, not even his own freedom. Every aspect of his life was controlled by someone else. He could not choose where to live, what work to do, or whether tomorrow would bring kindness or cruelty. By every external measure, he had almost no control over his circumstances. Yet Epictetus arrived at one of the most liberating ideas in human history. He realized that, although others could chain his body, they could never fully control his mind. This insight became the foundation of his teaching. He repeatedly reminded his students that the most important distinction in life is knowing what belongs to us and what does not. Our judgments, choices, values, and actions are ours. Wealth, reputation, health, and the opinions of others are influenced by many factors beyond our control. At first glance, this may sound restrictive. In reality, it is deeply freeing. Imagine carrying 2 heavy bags every day. One contains responsibilities that genuinely belong to you, your integrity, your effort, your decisions, the way you treat other people. The second is filled with burdens you were never meant to carry, what strangers think of you, whether everyone approves of your choices, every possible future outcome, every mistake you've already made. Most people spend their lives carrying both bags. Stoicism asks a simple question: why exhaust yourself carrying weight that was never yours? Modern psychology offers a similar perspective. Studies on stress consistently show that people experience greater emotional well-being when they focus their energy on aspects of life they can influence rather than becoming consumed by uncontrollable events. This doesn't mean ignoring problems. It means directing attention toward meaningful action instead of endless worry. Epictetus understood this long before laboratories and psychological journals existed. His teachings were practical, not theoretical. He knew suffering firsthand. He wasn't writing from the comfort of privilege. He was speaking from experience, which is perhaps why his words continue to resonate nearly 2,000 years later. Another great Stoic came from the opposite end of Roman society. Seneca was wealthy, influential, and deeply involved in politics. He advised emperors, accumulated great riches, and experienced both immense success and devastating setbacks. At different points in his life, he was celebrated, exiled, recalled, and ultimately ordered to take his own life by Emperor Nero. His story reminds us that external success does not protect anyone from uncertainty. Seneca observed something that feels remarkably relevant today. People often spend more time imagining future disasters than enjoying the present moment. He wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Think about how often this happens. A difficult conversation hasn't even begun, yet your mind has already rehearsed 10 possible arguments. A medical appointment is still days away, but you've imagined the worst possible diagnosis. A presentation at work is next week, yet you've already convinced yourself it will be a disaster. Psychologists call this catastrophizing, a cognitive distortion in which the mind automatically predicts the worst possible outcome despite limited evidence. It's a well-documented thinking pattern associated with anxiety, and learning to recognize it is an important part of several therapeutic approaches. Seneca's insight wasn't that bad things never happen. They do. His point was that our imagination often creates additional suffering before reality has even arrived. How much of our emotional energy is spent living in futures that never actually happen? It's a question worth sitting with. The Stoics didn't encourage blind optimism. They encouraged clear thinking. They believed courage begins when we stop confusing imagined fears with present reality. Perhaps this is one reason Stoicism is experiencing such a revival today. In an age of constant information, our minds are exposed to an endless stream of possible threats. Every notification has the potential to trigger worry. Every headline competes for attention. Every scroll invites comparison. The human brain evolved to detect danger, but it was never designed to process thousands of potential dangers every single day. Without realizing it, many of us have become trapped in a cycle of constant mental vigilance. Stoicism offers an alternative: return to the present. Respond to what is real. Act with wisdom. Leave the rest. This isn't denial. It's disciplined attention. It's choosing to invest mental energy where it can actually make a difference. And then there was the most famous Stoic of them all, a man who ruled nearly the entire known world, a Roman emperor whose private journal would eventually become one of the most influential books ever written. His name was Marcus Aurelius. History remembers him as one of Rome's greatest emperors. But when you read his personal writings, something unexpected emerges. You don't encounter a man boasting about power. You encounter someone constantly reminding himself how to remain humble, patient, disciplined, and kind in the middle of extraordinary pressure. His journal, now known as Meditations, was never intended for publication. It wasn't written to impress anyone. It was a conversation with himself, a daily effort to keep his own mind grounded. That alone reveals something profound. Even one of history's most powerful individuals had to train his thinking every single day. Mental strength wasn't automatic, it was practiced. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson these Stoics leave us. Resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, one thought, one choice, and one response at a time. If the Stoics were alive today, they would probably be amazed by what neuroscience has discovered about the human brain. Not because modern science proves every Stoic belief, but because many scientific findings echo a simple truth the Stoics observed through careful reflection. The way we repeatedly think influences the way we experience the world. For centuries, people believed the brain was largely fixed after childhood. Your personality was your personality. Your habits were your habits. Your emotional responses were simply part of who you were. But over the past several decades, neuroscience has transformed that understanding. The brain is remarkably adaptable. Scientists call this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming and strengthening neural connections throughout life. Every repeated thought, every practiced behavior, and every learned response reinforces certain pathways. In other words, the brain becomes more efficient at whatever it repeatedly does. This has profound implications. If you spend years rehearsing fear, your brain becomes increasingly efficient at detecting threats. If you constantly compare yourself with others, comparison becomes more automatic. If you repeatedly respond to challenges with panic, those reactions can become deeply ingrained. But the opposite is also true. Calm can be practiced. Patience can be strengthened. Gratitude can become more natural. Resilience can grow. The Stoics never used the word neuroplasticity, yet their entire philosophy was built upon daily mental training. They believed wisdom wasn't something you suddenly acquired one morning. It was cultivated through consistent practice, much like strengthening a muscle. Marcus Aurelius understood this better than most. Each day, before facing the demands of governing an empire, he reminded himself of principles he knew he would need. He anticipated difficult people, unexpected setbacks, and moments of frustration, not to become pessimistic, but to prepare his mind before those challenges arrived. Today, psychologists recognize a similar principle. Mental rehearsal is widely used in areas such as elite sport, performance psychology, and resilience training. Visualizing challenges and practicing constructive responses can improve confidence, decision-making, and emotional regulation when those situations arise. Preparation changes performance. The Stoics understood this intuitively. Another remarkable connection between Stoicism and modern psychology lies in emotional regulation. Many people believe emotions simply happen to us. I'm angry because of what they said. I'm anxious because of tomorrow. I'm miserable because life isn't going my way. Certainly, circumstances influence our emotions. The Stoics never denied that. But they asked a deeper question. Between the event and your reaction, is there a moment, a brief space in which you can choose how to respond? Modern psychology increasingly suggests that there often is. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, famously wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. Although Frankl developed his ideas independently, many scholars have noted parallels between his emphasis on human agency and earlier Stoic thought. This space is where emotional freedom begins. Imagine someone criticizes you. The immediate emotional reaction may be disappointment or frustration, but what happens next? One path leads to rumination. You replay the conversation for hours. You imagine what you should have said. You assume everyone agrees with the criticism. You begin doubting your own abilities. A single comment becomes an entire story. Another path begins differently. You pause. You ask yourself whether the criticism is accurate. If it contains truth, you learn from it. If it doesn't, you let it pass without allowing it to define your identity. The external event remains the same. The internal experience becomes entirely different. That doesn't mean emotions disappear. It means emotions no longer become your master. This distinction is one of the greatest misconceptions about Stoicism. Stoics were never trying to eliminate emotion. They were trying to prevent destructive emotions from controlling their judgment. Courage still existed. Love still existed. Compassion still existed. Joy still existed. What they questioned was the habit of allowing every external circumstance to dictate inner peace. Modern neuroscience offers another fascinating perspective. When the brain perceives danger, the amygdala helps initiate rapid survival responses. This system has protected human beings for thousands of years. But in today's world, the brain can sometimes respond to social rejection, uncertainty, or imagined threats as though they were immediate physical dangers, an unanswered email, a difficult meeting, a financial concern, a harsh comment online. The body may react with increased heart rate, muscle tension, and heightened alertness even though no immediate physical threat exists. This response isn't a flaw. It's part of being human, but awareness changes everything. By learning to pause, breathe, examine our thoughts, and respond deliberately, we engage brain systems involved in reflection and self-control rather than reacting purely on instinct. The Stoics practiced this long before anyone understood the biology behind it. They believed wisdom begins when reaction gives way to reflection. Perhaps nowhere is this more relevant than in the modern attention economy. Every day, companies compete for one resource more valuable than money: your attention. Notifications interrupt conversations, algorithms reward outrage, news cycles thrive on urgency. Social media encourages endless comparison. Without realizing it, many people spend their days reacting instead of choosing. Reacting to headlines, reacting to comments, reacting to opinions, reacting to fear. Stoicism quietly asks, who is directing your mind? You or everything around you? That question may be more important today than it was 2,000 years ago, because attention shapes thought. Thought shapes habit. Habit shapes character. And character ultimately shapes the direction of a life. Marcus Aurelius understood this when he wrote that the quality of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Modern psychology wouldn't phrase it exactly the same way, but decades of research continue to show that habitual thinking patterns influence emotional well-being, behavior, and resilience. The ancient emperor and the modern scientist are speaking different languages. Yet, in some respects, they're pointing toward the same destination. A disciplined mind is not built by chance. It is built